First thing was, as being as outspoken as you were, like as you are on social media, affected you, seeing as you're in the entertainment industry. And I feel like, at least from um, just a regular person's perspective, I feel like people in the entertainment industry aren't often as open about that kind of stuff, like their opinions.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the it's like the Michael Jordan thing from the 90s. There was I want to say it was an issue with maybe like local Chicago politics or something like that. I can't remember because I was a little young at the time, but and it kind of took on like racial overtones, and they were a lot of I mean, similar to now, where there's like conservatives and Democrats kind of like on different sides of the line, and they looked at Michael Jordan to kind of like, hey, is he going to speak up? You know, there's very few people that have come along since Muhammad Ali that kind of are of that stature, especially that crossover from entertainment or sports and stuff like that. That can be like a notable voice in social politics and things like that. You think of Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and since then, I mean, Jordan was really the only guy since then, and then now LeBron that would kind of fit that mold. And I remember when that was going on, and he wouldn't make an endorsement either way, and then there other stuff had come up like regarding like Nike and things like that, and he had a different answer one time where he only went as far as saying, well, Republicans buy shoes too. And I think that in a nutshell kind of demonstrates like what you had just said. Like a lot of times people are attached to their brand in such a way that they don't want to really speak from the heart. But I think that is not necessarily only an indictment of the public figure, but it's also an indictment of how we treat people as a society. Like people
Yeah.
shouldn't, like we look at people like it's kind of like the idea of, you see it now in like memes and things. Be original. Wait, not like that.
Oh
Be
yeah.
independent. No, not like that. Like don't follow what other people say except for this, like that sort of thing. And it's a joke, but it's kind of like true, because it's like, oh, you're a public figure, like use your platform and do this. But then when somebody does, if you don't agree with it, it's like, no, 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 don't use your
Yeah.
platform for that. Well, it's like, well, then tell me what you would like, program me, essentially is what,
Yeah.
yeah, tell me how you would like me to be programmed. And so, and everybody kind of goes through it. And like I said, that was with Jordan before LeBron too. I mean, he's very outspoken, and I think that he does maintain a lot of probably what his original voice wants to say, but then some stuff will come up like with China and the NBA, and it's like, why out of all the things that you speak out against or
Yeah.
for, for or against, whatever it may be, and that's a glaring issue that it's like, well, clearly there's a business reason for that, and so I think everybody kind of goes through that. And in my case, I don't know, I mean, I look at myself as a person first, and a professional entertainer or athlete.
Yeah.
Not even, I mean, that's so far down the list for me. Like, I don't really look at myself like that, to be honest. So a lot of times, if there ever are consequences to me just being open about what I think or opinionated or whatever, and I'm not totally opinionated, but you know, one opinion that nobody likes, all of a sudden you're super opinionated.
Oh yeah.
But usually the consequence or repercussion of it like takes a while to reverberate with me, because I'm not really, I don't think of myself like a brand. So I try to keep my finger off that pulse as much as I possibly can.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of similar to that. A couple weeks ago, you posted something on your Instagram story, which I thought was pretty interesting, and it was basically you said that you had never voted and that you probably
Yeah.
will. Is there like a particular reason for that, or is it just the fact that it's like a toxic bipartisan system that like you have to choose one or the other?
A lot of it is that, um, and the way that we have set up the system of how to educate yourself in order to vote, I think is really, because of that reason, it's really the wrong way to kind of bring young people into it, I think,
Yeah.
to teach them that they have to pick a team, and that whatever team you're on, the other side is going to be like morally inept, socially inept, and that's not necessarily true. Like you have, left leaning voters and young liberals looking at anybody that's on the conservative side of the line like you're this evil scum of the earth. And it's like these people believe in equality too. These people
Yeah.
believe in, you know, the same things you believe in. They might have different economic approaches to it, but they're not out to screw anybody. You know what I mean?
Right.
Mhm.
And then say on the other side of the line, like a lot of people, like I know, a lot of conservative friends that are like, man, like young liberals are so radical. They're almost becoming so fascist in nature in the way that they behave. And it's like, well, they're not all like that. But, the fact that simply being put in a position to pick a team makes you think that way.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, and, a lot of it also has to do with that. I mean, for lack of a better explanation, like our votes don't really count, and the way that the system works with the electoral college and all that, like it doesn't really matter what the popular vote is.
Right.
And the last election demonstrated that, um, popular vote, like complicated things. People didn't understand why that didn't sway anything or count for certain
Mhm.
things. The electoral college doesn't necessarily adhere to what the popular vote
Right.
is. Those people are appointed. It's not like a majority rules system for them. And on on top of that, uh there was the whole like um idea that maybe like votes were interfered with on both sides of the line.
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
Like our president was investigated for it, and a lot of that turned up null and void. But then a lot came out that, you know, a lot of people on Hillary's side of the line interfered with it. So then it's like, well, what does the popular vote even matter now? It
Yeah.
doesn't count
Mhm.
in the first place, and we're fighting over it. We don't even know how to count it. And so I actually posted recently where I said, um, uh, it that you could pretty much just write on your Facebook wall who you would rather be your leader, and that counts as much as if you voted in a ballot, because it's all you're really doing is just telling people and then putting it out there, and that's it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So somebody else is really going to vote for you.
Right.
So I think that has a lot to do with it. And then not that I don't consider this to be a rebellious thing, but I do think that part of the right to vote is the right to not participate if you don't want to. And
Yeah. I
that's
agree.
something that a lot of people, unless you've traveled and you see how other countries are, like you can't say certain things in other countries. You can't not participate, like especially like older style, like socialist and communist countries and things like that. And like, God forbid, like dictatorships and things like that. If you choose not to participate, that's it. Like you don't
Yeah.
have that,
Mhm.
you don't have the right to back out. You basically have to hide. And so I think it's great that we live in a place where, if somebody wants to vote, I always tell them, please go vote, do what you have the right to do. But if you don't want to, then that's also part of your right, is that as well. Sorry, hang on a second, I gotta cancel this. All right, are we back? Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're fine.
uh, so yeah, I think those few reasons are really kind of what shaped my reasoning for not having voted, and I still haven't ever voted. I don't think I've ever registered to vote.
Yeah.
If the system were to change, and that's highly unlikely because it's just not practical to count,
Oh yeah.
3 billion votes or whatever. Maybe if that were the case, but there's so much about the culture of it. And now being I'm a 36-year-old man, and I've lived through however many presidents, and in my adulthood, we're talking Clinton, Bush, Obama, now Trump, like of what I've lived through as like um from like an adult, like handling my own life sort of age. And it really didn't make that big of a difference to me who my leader was. So for
Yeah.
that reason, I feel like, if you feel passionate about it, go ahead and vote. And if you don't, like for me, it didn't matter.
Right.
So
Yeah. One thing about that I, just me personally think is like what's really kind of in my opinion, one of the bad things about the two-party system. And with like what you were saying, like people like putting the word radical on it, like people think everyone on the other side is radical, and like oftentimes that's not the case. Like people are just painting them as that, so like you'll disagree with them because like the vast majority of people are in the middle and they're just like slightly leaning one direction. And so the fact that you have two people that are painted as complete opposites is like it's really kind of seems unfair to the people because they think that they're voting for two completely different people, but the reality is most people are in the middle and they want, I mean, everyone wants what's better, what's best for the country. They just all have different opinions about what that is. And so whenever you like watch, and this is like goes for like big media corporations and like people posting on Instagram, like people just like you said tend to paint the other side as like extreme and like so much worse than they actually are. And it just kind of makes it hard, especially as someone who is young, like and people who are growing up, like as it seems to me at least to get more toxic as time goes on. Like it makes you feel like you're almost evil for voting for someone that's like tells you not to. Like me and Felix, we both grew up
Yeah.
in South Georgia, which is pretty conservative, and then I moved up to Atlanta for school. And Atlanta's pretty Democrat, and then also it's college. College is typically Democrat, and like the extreme differences were like crazy. Like both sides thought so heavily, like unequivocally, undoubtedly, I am right, they are wrong, they're evil. Like there's no middle ground. But
Yeah, yeah.
so I think that is like for me personally one of the biggest issues with the two-party system is just because most people are in the middle, and so putting those labels on it just kind of makes it seem like they're a lot further apart than they actually should be.
Yeah, I think that the thing about it is it becomes this like never-ending game of pivots and non sequiturs. You know, if you try to have that conversation, it like um, people usually and they know they're doing it, and it's just that the idea of communication is broken.
Hmm.
Because like I said in the beginning, like you know, people who are Democrat and like young liberals, like they look at anybody that's conservative or libertarian as like, you know, oh, you're prejudiced, you're racist, or you're misogynist, or whatever. This, and this. But everybody I know that's conservative or libertarian or whatever, they're like they believe in equality and all these things, no different than any young liberal does. That literally the ideas that split the two is just the handling of economics. Moral compass really shouldn't be
Yeah,
on the table, but that's what everybody starts off with because they know that starting off with that is like the other person has to now fight an uphill battle.
right.
You know, if out the gate it's like, well, if I start the conversation, if I'm a young liberal and I start the conversation off with, I just don't understand why, you know, you would have such a racist idea of this or that or that. Now this person's going to have to defend the fact that they're racist this entire conversation.
Yeah,
And that doesn't make any sense. It has nothing to do with that. Um, and, you know, and there's always going to be, especially in regards to like party systems, there's always going to be certain things that are going to be good and bad on both sides of the line, which is why that's tough because like individual issues put together in one big package, not every single issue you're going to agree with,
right.
you know, but you have to pick whatever team I guess checks off the most boxes for you, you know.
Yeah,
So I think that's, you know, to your point about having a two-party system. It's funny because if I were to vote, I'd probably vote for Jorgensen.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
I like
That might have
Jorgensen
been,
honestly.
yeah.
I think she's
And
pretty good.
I actually hope that she stayed. Like this was obviously more of her coming out party, and this wasn't a race for her to win.
Hmm.
You know, like you have one candidate that's you know, fighting for a second term, and maybe in many ways is probably heavily favored to get it, depending on how you look at the Democratic Party, which is a little bit kind of a mess,
Yeah,
as far as them wanting, you know, having a model candidate for their party. I think that they were a little bit undecided. I mean, as you can see, like with the pairing that they chose, but like it, and their game was going to be to play off of each other, obviously. So like Jorgensen didn't really, I don't think she really was ever going to have a chance. But I think it's great for her to have this introduction, introduce her ideas and her policies and stuff like that, because and at a good age, you know, because now you look at the next term if we get a second term for Trump, he's obviously going to be out of the next race. I'm sure Biden probably, like Bernie, probably can't run. I mean, he's just getting
Right.
too old. So there's going to be all kinds of new candidates, and I feel like her having been in the race and like staying with it, I think that I mean, I think make a great case for being our first female president. I think that she would
Oh
be
yeah,
Hmm.
definitely. I agree.
she'd be a great one. But yeah, I mean, and it's a shame that she gets kind of batted down because of the idea of like a two-party system. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and playing off that, what I guess this is more so just a personal grievance than like a conversation. Is like I'll see stuff on social media and it'll say like a vote for a third party is a vote for Biden or a vote for a third party is a vote for Trump, and so I feel like people who like super like hardcore like or dislike the other candidate, they'll say like voting for a third party is just a waste, and they'll like discourage people voting
throwing
for a
away your
third party.
vote.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like what we were saying in the beginning, like be original, not like that.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
Because then it's like you have to vote or die, whatever, all the different hashtags. Like you have to vote, but if you voted conservative, that person will be like, oh well, you did it wrong.
yeah,
Or if you're like, oh, I voted libertarian, I like this candidate, I think that they're going to keep us afloat economically speaking, they're going to allot us the right amount of freedom, whatever your case may be. Like, oh well, you're throwing it away because it's clearly this guy versus this guy, and it's like,
Hmm.
well, then don't tell me again. It's like, tell me exactly what you want me to do.
right.
The thing for me that is like sort of disturbing about that is that I tend to see that sort of hypocrisy among like young liberal citizens more so than conservative citizens. Like I don't really see that from like young conservatives or even older conservatives. If you just vote for whoever you vote for, then they're just like, whatever, this is our guy.
Right.
But I feel like the guilt trip and all that sort of thing, like all these things that really shouldn't really play a part in like politics conversation or debate, that usually gets applied from the side that prides itself on being so anti-fascist and anti totalitarianism and stuff like that. And it's like, you guys are rapidly becoming like what the idea of what fascism is.
Right.
Like cancel culture and just all this type of stuff. Like, I mean, this is literally dictatorship by community.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So both Felix and I are 19, so this is like our first election, like as adults. But
uh,
so like obviously I don't know exactly how much like my life or my parents' lives are affected by previous presidents, but it's like pretty obvious like the candidates are super divisive and like they don't like each other. But I have like seen clips back in like McCain versus Obama that election, and
yeah.
like there was a clip and there was a voter like asking McCain something about Obama, and it was like something that was just completely untrue. I don't remember what it was, but then McCain was like, "Don't say that. Like he's a good man. We just have like different views on how to run the country." And like it seemed like for a while, at least like reading history books, that it was just like they had mutual respect for each other, like two candidates, but they just had different ideas on how to run the country. But nowadays, it's like the two sides hate each other. It's like, do you like as someone who has been an adult through some elections, is there like a certain moment that you think kind of shifted it from people having mutual respect as candidates to hating each other?
Oh yeah, Twitter.
Yeah.
I mean, we're over, so like I think like the whole Bush and Kerry was kind of like this. I remember a lot of my like friends who were like very heavily liberal, that it was just like they couldn't stand Bush. I think when it was like Obama's election, it wasn't as much of that. Like I think Obama seemed like he seemed really good on paper. I don't think he turned out as good as president. To be honest, in my adult life, he's probably been the worst president I've lived through, which isn't to say he was a terrible one. Just like he just was lowest on the list for me,
Yeah.
I think. But I think he was an incredible like public figure. So a lot of people, and like you said, like with the way McCain, like his take on everything, it didn't seem as divisive. But also, social media was a little young at the time still. But I do think I remember, I remember Bush and Kerry being kind of like that. But I think social media is it. I mean, this is like all politicians. Obviously, they're going to run their race. The idea is to buy votes. The slanted part of it is that traditionally conservative parties are based on economic policies. They're trying to make sure the bottom line is protecting the country, which is something I personally agree with. I wouldn't classify myself as conservative. I think I'm politically fluid, I guess,
Hmm.
if you could
Yeah.
be gender fluid, I feel like you could be politically fluid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I agree with that because I'm also very pro-capitalist as far as like free market. I think that's the best case scenario for continued growth and ambition amongst citizens and like economic health and all that. But the idea is to, like I said, to buy votes, and conservative policy doesn't lend itself to that. They basically just hope to give you good news once they perform,
Yeah.
which is why you see like with President Trump, like, I mean, he set a lot of records for the best economy we've had. So that's
Yeah.
usually what his talking points are, is like, look, lowest unemployment amongst minorities, high minimum wage, market health is high, stock, real estate, bad foreign deals finally got out of, like, he's trying to give you bottom lines because traditionally that's what they operate on. Whereas I feel like, for decades, since like the 60s, Democratic Party has always been to buy votes off the lower classes because that's a mathematical game. There's obviously more poor people and lower classes. Lower and middle class will always outnumber the upper class in America. You
Right.
know,
Hmm.
the power wielded financially is a total offset. It's the other direction. But in terms of sheer numbers, like aiming at that demographic is why they always are heavily into socialist policies and welfare state and things like that, because you know most citizens are uneducated, they don't know any better, and if you dangle that carrot in front of them of, look, here's free stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't want free stuff? If you're a student getting pinned under some student loans, who doesn't want free stuff? If you're somebody who is a medical patient for a certain condition, who doesn't want free stuff? If you live in a single parent household, who doesn't want free stuff? And like
Yeah.
that's so like that's that method. So I think with the advent of social media, that's just honestly them playing that game is like what do people use social media for? Like in the 20 years it's been around, since the early days of, I guess, Facebook, MySpace, and message boards, things like that. I'm still waiting for it to be this beacon of like positive voice for everybody, because nobody uses it for positivity. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Everybody uses it for negativity, and I think that our politics now, especially in the last two elections, has become about that. Is that it's really just politicians using a new platform as a new tool to play the same game they always have, is how do we buy votes off these people? And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, us versus that guy, here's why you all should hate that guy, make memes about that guy, and then vice versa. They're just trying to use a new tool to play the same game.
Yeah. So with social media, like I completely agree. Social media is like a huge issue with that stuff, and with I think just in general, social media is kind of a societal issue because of how addicting it is, and I mean that's like a whole other thing how bad social media is. But do you think that there will be a point where social media like reaches a boiling point and like it just kind of collapses in some form, whether it be like politically, economically, socially, like social media just kind of like resets, like has some kind of huge effect on society that isn't as gradual as it has been.
Well, I don't know. That's a tough question. Part of me wants to say that it would kind of take people in power, like, as far as, and by empower I mean people that are figureheads of these platforms, to be kind of victimized by it, and then maybe then things will change. But the thing is, like, somebody will always just take their place, and a lot of times that's how the world works. You eat your own and it just keeps going.
Yeah.
um and and the other thing is that kind of discouraged me off of thinking that that might be the turning point, is that, like, especially with this election, like uh, a majority of media is liberal media, and almost all social media, like nearly 100% of it is liberal controlled like platforms, you know. So you see a lot of like censorship against like conservative notes and things like that, conservative posts. I don't know if you guys have seen lately, like when like a link will pop up and it's like it gives you like a little disclaimer on Twitter where it's like
Oh
uh,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
headline does not tell the whole story and like stuff like
Oh,
that.
the fact
And
checks.
it, yeah, and it's like you don't ever see that for like pieces of liberal news, but you always see
Mm-hmm.
it if it's conservative news. So part of me thinks that like if ever, you know, a liberal leader or figurehead or a person from these platforms were to ever kind of get in hot water and almost become a victim of their own culture, they would just censor their way out of it. You know, it's
Yeah.
kind of scary. It's very 1984ish, like when you think about it. It's very Orwellian. But you know, so I kind of thought that that would be the tipping point. But who knows? You know, I always thought that it would be. I don't know. It it's 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 a weird thing. You know, I think if enough people like start to get older and generations go by, and you know, not everybody stays on. There's a half life to people's life on social media. You know,
Yeah.
I think the half life for males on social media is a lot longer. Females tends to be shorter, and I get this just from judging from like say like my job in professional wrestling. You know, I'll see a group of fans say like in 2009 or something, and they'll come in and they're late teens, early 20s, that sort of thing, and they'll be the same as everybody is now, like, you know, kind of hate filled, overcompensating, and which, you know, that's the way it is. Like social media has replaced bars and pubs for people. You know, it
Yeah.
used to be
Mm-hmm.
you get off work and you go grab a drink with your friends and hang out for a little while, and that's how you guys socialize, and then you go home. And then in the morning you pick up a newspaper and then you go to and see what's going on in the world, and then you go to work. Well, the newspaper and the pub have just been replaced by Twitter and Instagram. When you get off work, what do? You jump on social media and
Yeah.
you're wild out. You wild out on social media. That's what people do. And when you get up in the morning, you don't read the newspaper, you read your timeline. Um, so I've seen people come and go in these like 3 to 5 year periods. And for me, I surmise that like, for example, a young woman, maybe like late teens, early 20s, they'll live this kind of life, and then eventually, you know, they'll start a family, perhaps unexpectedly, or they'll, you know, get into a career and start a family and meet somebody, get married, and they're not going to sit around on Twitter all day. Like
Right.
the number of women that are like that stay in this type of atmosphere, it exponential. I mean, it drops so low because they have more important stuff to worry about.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think men mature a lot slower and they don't have the same type of like delicate sensibility. You know, men don't accidentally get pregnant, you know, for example. They can't all of a sudden like, oh, like real life just hit me right now, you know. So they tend to maybe live on in this atmosphere until like they're like almost middle age. But you know, at a certain point, you know, they got to live life too, and they got to move out of their parents' house, or they got to start their career. They got to take care of, you know, a family that they just started, you know, something like that. And then I'll see, you know, somewhere around 2013, a bunch of these people got replaced by new people. And then I see that happen again in like 2016, and then now in 2020. And I see these groups of people, like they grow up and they get off social media, and then they get, and then new people come in, they go.
Yeah.
I sort of think that that's where we're at right now, and it's going to be like that probably for God the next couple decades. Just people are just going to live their little half life of social media life, and you know, those of us, like for me, like I'm on it because of my career. If I wasn't, I wouldn't be on it. But you know, people like me have this unique kind of Yoda perspective where we're going to like live through all these people's social media lives and kind of see them come and go.
Yeah. So for me personally, with social media, like, and I'm thankful for it now, but as a kid, I didn't like it. My parents like wouldn't let me have a smartphone until I got into high school, And like all I had was like a flip phone, so if I'm ever home alone for 10 minutes before my parents get home from work, I can call them, tell them I'm home okay. And everyone I like knew at school always had smartphones and like had Instagram and stuff, and like I really really wanted that. And then like now that I'm an adult and I understand like how bad that can be, especially for like young people, like just like some of the mental issues that it can cause, I'm like extremely thankful that I wasn't like that. But it was really hard, obviously, as a kid who didn't know any better, that like getting social media and stuff like that super young was like dangerous. And then because of that, like I'm not a huge fan of social media now anyway. Like I don't follow a ton of people and like I don't try to not to involve myself in drama too much. Like I try to use it for just like keeping in touch with people. But even then, like still just being the nature of being young, like I'm on it and stuff. And I don't know, like sometimes I just wish that I had grown up in a society that social media didn't exist. Because like you were saying, like people would afterward go out to like bars or whatever and like wake up and then read a newspaper. Like I would be curious as to like what life would be like if I grew up then. Because like social media
You
has
know,
changed everything.
I miss it, to be honest. There's a lot of days I mean, of course you can just unplug optionally, but some days I wake up and or just throughout the day, I just kind of miss what life was like when it was like you didn't know immediately everything that was going on, and people didn't have this immediate access to you, and you didn't have immediate access to other people's thoughts and opinions and stuff. And that's the thing. I think that, and I think a lot of people go through this when they get older and they start to understand how little other people's opinions really matter, even when it involves you. And I read like I guess it was kind of like a meme or like a proverb or something recently, about, and it was something along the lines of your opinion of me is none of my business. And there's just so much wisdom in that. Like, no, you don't really want to know what anybody about you thinks. As you don't really want to know what anybody about you thinks about you either. You
Right.
know, like because there's always going to be something negative or something that you don't necessarily agree with, or something that doesn't fall in line with you. And in a way, ignorance truly is bliss in that way, and that's kind of part of the harmony of life. I think that social media in that way has robbed us of that innocence, because
Yeah.
now you know every positive or negative, mostly negative thought that everybody has, and you didn't really need to always know that, you know. um and I just think that it's by design. It's not meant for any sort of positive voice, because when you really think about it, and I posted about this recently too, um it was at the start of a lot of the BLM stuff this year, when the protests were first happening, and people were posting black squares and stuff like that. And I was kind of had brought up the point that like these platforms are not really designed for you to have this positive voice to reach people, because it's an echo chamber by
Hmm.
nature. I mean, ever since Facebook, MySpace, onto Twitter, Instagram, any of these social media, Snapchat, whatever it is. I mean, if you even just look at the step by step of being involved with it, creating it, making an account or whatever, it's from step one. It's designing an echo chamber for you. You pick a screen name, a username based on whatever you like. Then you're going to answer like, what are you into? Cars, sports, traveling, whatever. and
Yeah.
then and then you're going to pick a list of people that you want to follow. So you're crafting this echo chamber that's only going to be like-minded stuff.
Right.
And
Hmm.
then that's how people are going to find you, is by like-minded stuff. So when you think you're putting a message out there to spread positivity, you're speaking to people that already agree with you. The amount of change you're creating is so minimal, if zero. Because you're not speaking to anybody who disagrees with you. You know why? Because they don't follow you, and you
Right.
don't follow
Right.
them. You know what I'm saying? So it's like trying to create alien allies, and you're just shouting into outer space. Like, you know, in fact, that's actually more constructive, because maybe they'll hear that.
Yeah.
you know like you're speaking, you're literally preaching to the choir. You're not talking new people into the church, is what it is. So like,
Yeah.
that's the other thing that's, I think, bad about it, is that it gives people this false sense of production, and especially for people that are you know, participate in activism, you know, it gives you this false sense of work and accomplishment that you're not. You're simply not. You guys are just people are just high fiving each other, and that's
Yeah.
Hmm.
yeah.
So kind of along that, and something you mentioned earlier about like a lot of what just the political arguments should be is just economics, and then people just kind of bring in like other stuff to it. Like we pretty much everyone agrees like racism is wrong, obviously. So like the
Right.
fact that that's seems like a left versus right issue is kind of dumb. And then one thing I noticed like with the debates, I don't know if you watched any of them, but they like a very small portion of any of the debates was about economics. Like there was like entire sections for like social issues, and like social issues are important, but kind of like you said, I feel like most people agree. Like whenever all this BLM stuff started, like it started with like police brutality, and like a lot of those cases, I'm pretty sure like everyone agrees, like when people were wrongfully killed, like the cop that was on his neck for like 5 minutes or whatever it was, like obviously the cop should not have done that. I don't think I saw anyone like personally or on social media that thought that was okay. And so then it like started this whole big thing, and like like the black squares, BLM, and that whole thing like spread really fast. And I was just kind of confused at the beginning because
Hmm.
I thought like everyone agreed like racism is bad. Like why is that even a discussion? Like I feel like everyone agrees that that's bad. And then like social media obviously just makes that whole thing worse.
Yeah, I mean, it goes without saying, and I don't, and I think that's what I mean about like going back to the previous point with social media. Like, um, I think people find this false sense of accomplishment when they can make such a safe statement like, racism is bad. Well, of course, nobody believes that it's good, you
Right.
know?
Hmm.
Um, and I think people tend to not want to dive into the deeper problems because they don't get as much self gratification out of it because there's a lot of work to be done, you know? There's a really good podcaster. His name's Coleman Hughes, and he covers a lot of stuff that people don't like, a lot of insights that people don't look deep into regarding a lot of social issues. He got really into the protests and stuff this year, and he had cited like a lot. He had cited some different studies and stuff done that were previously done before any of the issues this year, or at least the recent ones, and kind of diving into the idea that like it's not so much a racist issue as it is an abuse of power issue. Like for example, a study was done. The police are twice as likely to mishandle or manhandle a person of color as they are a white person, and that's to be expected. That's kind of the narrative that we've always believed. Like, okay, well, that's institutional racism or whatever the case may be.
Hmm.
And that turned out to be valid. If you're a minority, you're twice as likely to be mistreated in an altercation for whatever reason with the
Right.
police, whether you broke a rule or not. What what was surprising was that, um, like for example, last year, the amount of like unarmed people slayed by police, 19 of them were white, 8 of them were black.
Hmm.
So it's double the amount. And of course, there are more white people in the country than black people. But when you adjust for the idea that the average black person is much younger than the average white person, most of white people being the majority is a lot of older white people living, you know.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, and when you adjust for the fact that these altercations happen with people on the younger age scale, it's never senior citizens like that are getting into these run-ins,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
police. Then the difference is almost non-existent.
Yeah.
Um, so it's really not an issue of your skin color. It's an issue of them abusing their power and policing their own.
Yeah.
One of the things that I had suggested, because I don't really believe in posting black squares and using social media in that way, because I just think that's an empty exercise in self gratification. But one of the things I suggested, and this is because my parents are airline workers, is that like if Delta has an airplane crash, it's not investigated by Delta, it's investigated by the FAA, and so it becomes a federal issue. So they can't just police their own. And I think that's really an issue that's fixable right now. And that's the other thing, like with social media, a lot of it is like, well, what is your goal? Like, why are you protesting? What's your goal? I want to end racism. Well, good luck, because in the history of the world, there's never been a murder rate of 0. There's never been a crime rate of 0.
Exactly.
There's never been a prejudice rate of 0. None of those things have ever been 0, ever. And it never will be, unless we become Skynet. You know what I mean? Like, that is, it's never going to be the case. So it's like, well, what's a realistic goal? And then it becomes super radical. Well, burn it all down and, defund all the police. And it's like, okay, well, like, then our crime rate certainly isn't going to be 0.
Yeah.
So, but I think a good idea of reform was to, have some sort of, and I'm very anti big government. Like, I think that, like, the least amount of federal regulation, the better.
Me too.
I was very for the repeal for like net neutrality. That was more for a free market thing. But just in general, I think the less our government has hands and stuff, the better. But this is one thing I thought, okay, they should be federally investigated. That should be the norm. That's how it should be, just like the airlines and stuff like that. And that's fixable right now. Like, you can build a policy and get that done right now. And so Coleman Hughes dives into a lot of things like that you wouldn't think of, that like maybe this isn't really an issue of this, maybe the source of the issue is that. And then when he'll examine a lot of different studies that will suggest that.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree that I think it's more of an abuse of power issue. And one reason that, well, two things here. One thing is I think a reason that it's such a hard thing to talk about is because people blame it on different things. People blame that like there's over policing in minority neighborhoods, the fact that they're just in general, like, their average wealth is lower than like other races. People blame it on racist cops. For me personally, I think it's unions. I mean, I know there's like unions are a big like discussion with a lot of industries, but I don't think a cop should be able to, like, Derek Chauvin, he had like 13 or 14 like claimants against him for being overly aggressive. And like with unions, you can just like quit and move somewhere else and then get a job. And like I didn't really understand unions, like why they're bad, why they're good, because like, I was a kid, but I worked at a Kroger for a while, which is a grocery store, and they had a union there, and I wasn't part of the union because I got hired when they were switching HR managers, but I was supposed to be, but like just since the paperwork got like mishandled, I wasn't. But there was a worker there that was particularly bad. Like, he was like beyond bad. Like, I don't want to be rude or anything, but like half of his shift, he would just go stand in the utility closet and like not even work. But they couldn't fire him because the union wouldn't let him. And so that's like, for me personally, I just look at it like I know a coworker who's making the same wage as me, working 10% the amount as me in terms of effort. And he's yelled at customers, he's yelled at managers, and like never gotten fired. And like I just have been told, and like based on some of the research, is like a large part of that is because of the unions. And so I think, especially with the police, like whenever you're handling human lives and you're supposed to be the regulator of right and wrong in society, I feel like you shouldn't be protected when you do wrong because because there's going to be a team to sue your employer for firing you. And like, unions are good in the sense that they don't let people get fired for bad reasons, like, discrimination, but they are bad in the sense that they let people get away with a lot more than they should.
Yeah, I'm. One of the things I kind of think is interesting. I mean, I don't know what I guess I think about it, but it interested me, the idea of the trickle down effect, is that when certain policies, especially like administrations for presidency and all that, like when it's at that level, like a federal level, and their idea of I don't know, criminal reform, or like with like police and what they're aimed at accomplishing and attacking, how that has a trickle down effect just even on like on the regional levels with like police officers. Because then you think about, there's a paradox theory with So like, let's say if you're an activist and you are aimed at, I don't know, drunk driving, and you want to bring the alcoholism rate to zero. If you successfully do that, you cease to have a reason to exist.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, a lot of, I think we reached a tipping point a while back, but a lot of activism has become that. Like, in the last decade or so, there hasn't really been that many issues that it's like really a hill to die on, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like maybe like gay marriage was like a pretty big, like, kind of recent one. You
Yeah.
know, that's like, that was one of the last real big crusades where it's like, how do we not allow this yet? You know,
Right.
Yeah.
outside of that, it's like, it's been a while since it's like, you know, women couldn't own property or vote or something like that, or like, you know, minorities couldn't hold certain jobs or use the same bathroom. Yeah, like, it's been a long time since those days. Like, there's really not that many big issues that aren't reasonably chalked up to just human nature,
Yeah.
you know. Like, for example, with the police, and like you were saying with his name escapes me, but like, you see a lot of times where there's like, in these altercations, like, the police officer in question has so many red flags.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how does this not raise an issue?
Yeah.
Or like, how do people not see this coming? um and in that case, it's like, that's corruption of an institution. Like, that's an abuse of power, you know. That's a boys club, that's archaic thinking, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's racist thinking, but it's archaic, and it's corrupt in a general sort of way, which is even worse when it's generally corrupt and it's not specific. Like, that's, how does that just exist in that form? But then same thing on the side of the victims a lot of times, and people hate that you bring this up, like, oh, so and so was a criminal, they were a drug dealer, they were this or that, and it's like, don't bring that up. And it's like, yes, it's a tragedy, but that plays a role in it. You know, you have a cop with a laundry list of red flags, but you also have a citizen with a laundry list of red flags. That's a recipe for disaster. So that's a human problem. You know
Right.
what I mean? That, like, can it be a prejudice problem? Maybe. Like, there's a nuanced conversation to be had there, but one glance at that, any rational human being can say, it doesn't matter what color or religion or orientation either of these two people are. There's going to be an issue with these two, because that's they have so many red flags. Um, but the way that we've been over the last decade or more, like, the idea of prejudice, the idea of misogyny, the idea of racism, the idea of you know, discrimination against religion or orientation, has, we've successfully changed so much in the world over the last 50 to 100 years,
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of these wars are harder to fight because there's nothing to fight.
Yeah.
So what do we do as people? We start expanding the definitions through critical thinking. You know, well, if you think this, that's actually a byproduct of this, which means that you actually believe in this, which means you're racist. And it's like, well, no, that's not. But it's expanding the definition so you have something to continue fighting for.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the thing, is that, like, the trickle down effect of maybe our leaders at the federal level, how they approach criminal law, and like what our police forces and what they want to attack or address, you know, with their criminal reform or whatever their policies may be. I mean, this is a broad scale thing, so, you know, whatever it is. I mean, that sort of affects, you know, even people at the level of local police, because, you know, if there's no crime, the police, just like any other business, a hospital, Best Buy, Walmart, whatever, if there's no business, there's no money, and that
Mm-hmm.
means that there's no reason for them to exist.
Right.
So when there's nothing for them to do, that's how so many people who are just innocent soccer moms or dads trying to go to work, like, are getting, you know, BS traffic tickets and just random citations and stuff that doesn't need to be policed. You know, if they're aimed at more important stuff, and the definition of their need is expanded in a healthy way, so that they are needed for, and there's always going to be crime, you know.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
if they're aimed at something, then the meaningless crimes and the meaningless altercations, like I think, not that they'll cease to exist, but there's gonna be less of that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's sort of the thing, is like, you know, there is sort of a paradox theory that exists with these things where, you know, the closer they get to their goal, it means that they have nothing to do now,
Right.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and speaking to that, it just reminded me of a story that my dad told me that happened to one of his coworkers' wives. She was just driving home with her kids from school or something, and she like got into a turn lane because she had to make a left turn, and she like the front tire like grazed the solid white line when she went over because like the turn lane's like a dotted line and then it gets solid. She like barely touched the solid white line when getting over, and she got pulled over and arrested. Like, she didn't just get a ticket. Like, she got arrested because she had a speeding ticket from like a year ago and she paid it off, but I guess they didn't get that in the system. So the guy was like, "Yeah, you have a warrant out. You're gonna get arrested." And like her kids are like crying in the back and stuff. And it's like if you're like there's so little crime going on that you're gonna pull someone over and arrest them in front of their kids for like not fitting in that like perfect dotted line like while they get over. And like there's like that in that specific area. Like I was told by my parents, like apparently they pull people over a lot there, and I'm just like, I don't know. Like that's a harming society if someone's like missing the solid line by an inch or whatever when they're getting in a turn lane. But yeah, like there are some areas that have like more serious crimes, and then there's like discussion of over policing. But back to like Derek Chauvin, that was the cop that was on George Floyd's neck. And I think Felix is the one who told me about this, so he can correct me if I misquoted. But there was a prior thing, and this is one of the things that was on his file, is he and another cop were responding to a domestic abuse call, and I think they ended up killing the guy because he was being aggressive. And so you can have that or the discussion about whether or not it was justified or not. But when you have things like that on your record, that's something to like look into. And like I said, he had like I know it was at least a dozen. It was somewhere in like the high teens of complaints on him about being overly aggressive. And so, I mean, just not looking into things like that. Like there are things that are unpreventable, like things that are just gonna happen. But like there are some things like that are definitely preventable. And like I said, I don't think it's a race issue. I think it is just a like there's issues that we can fix, but
management issue.
Yeah. And with that thing you were saying about people like changing the definitions and expanding them so they have like a problem to attack, that really irritates me because there are a lot of real issues out there that we could be addressing, especially even if you look like beyond just our country. Like there's countries that don't have clean water, and like you're gonna change the definition to something that's mostly fixed here so you could have something to complain about and advocate for on social media. But there's like real issues that you could be like trying to make change for.
Isn't it Flint, Michigan that still doesn't have clean water?
Yeah, Flint, Michigan.
Yeah, Flint doesn't. And actually, my hometown in Riverside, California, I believe their water is pretty bad too. Ronda Rousey lives there, and I didn't. It's so funny. Until we were working together, I didn't even know she was a Riverside girl. But and I think she was the one that told me. She was like, our water is actually really bad. And yeah, I mean that's again a primary thing, but that comes down to I think just that's kind of like the weak will of people, and I like an analogy that I use for especially like for like young activists and a lot of them for like young liberals that are really fighting these issues that they don't really scratch the surface of, and they tend to be expanding these definitions just in order to have something to say. Like an analogy I use is like it's like when you're a kid and you're playing with the other neighbor kids out in the front yard or something like that, and you guys play like ghost hunters or something like that. You get your flashlights out and you go like you climb on the roof or go in the attic or something, and it's like we're hunting ghosts, and it's like, oh, I found one, oh, we gotta wait just in time, and it's like you're inventing something that's not really there to fight against.
Yeah.
But you're not really doing anything, and you reset and start the game all over again. And that's sort of like what happens. And a deeper part of the analogy is that like the whole time your mom and dad are like, will you quit screwing around and clean like rake the leaves, please? Will you do the laundry like you're supposed to do? And so you're leaving real problems or real things that you need to be doing, you're leaving those undone so you can play this stupid imaginary game. And that's sort of like an analogy that I've come to find is becoming more and more accurate now, is that people they want to invent a battle that doesn't need to be fought and fight it in the easiest way possible to feel good about it. And there's a lot of other stuff that's doable right now and addressable, but they don't want to do the work.
Right. Yeah. So, we just kind of talked about like BLM a little bit. So that's obviously been one of the biggest issues lately. One of the other big issues lately with like media, or I guess not necessarily with media, but that has been addressed in media, is the coronavirus. And
Yeah.
Someone being in the entertainment industry, we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, and obviously just being fans of the industry, we know how it affects it, but more in detail, like how has it affected your job, really?
I mean, volume is really the biggest thing, you know. Um, as of now, I don't feel like it's really been a safety issue because everything is, I guess, well handled. And, I've seen stuff that isn't well handled at all. And, maybe some people might, test positive or something like that, but nobody's really been adversely affected. I mean, in the industry, so to
Yeah.
speak, like not that, like I'm not talking as like the whole world in general, but as far as my job, like it has yet to be like a crazy safety issue, but I do think that like, the precautions uh, have obviously cut into the volume of it and things like that. So like that's really the primary thing is like people's just ability to go to work.
Yeah. And that's really troubling. Well, for me personally with COVID, so I said I go up to school in Atlanta earlier. So when I'm not in school, I just went back down to live with my parents because they closed down like the college campus altogether, and I lived on
Right.
campus last year. So I worked part time as well, and then went to school, and like they closed on campus. I just had to move back down to Savannah for the summer, and you know it didn't affect me that hard because I'm young. I have parents that are like willing to let me live in their house, so it wasn't like I
Right.
relied on my part-time pizza chef income for survival. But a lot of people did, and obviously the economy's it's been affected severely, and it's going to take a long time to recover fully from this. And as more information's come out recently, it kind of seems like COVID wasn't as bad as it was originally made out to be. And like I don't know, what are your thoughts on like that? Like looking back now that we have more information about how it was handled, and then like knowing what we know now.
I think the big thing recently, like CWC or CWC, CDC put out a correction to like their original literature on it that you know the actual, I think, death toll overall from just the virus alone was like more like 10,000
Mm-hmm.
people.
Hmm.
Because people they ballpark it and they get so fixated on one number. Um, so if you say 100,000, 200,000, that's all they think of. They don't think about the scale and the breakdown, the ratio, things like that. Like when we hit 100,000, for example, not only was it not simply just because of the coronavirus, but like the ratio and breakdown of it was like, I mean, less than 20,000 people at that time, less than 20,000 people under the age of like 50 had died from it. Like it was really, really small, like the amount of people that had been like affected by it in that way at a certain
Hmm.
age.
Yeah.
And it was like statistically you had a better chance of winning the lottery if you were under the age of, I think, 60.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think you were twice as likely to get struck by lightning no matter what age you were. Like that's what the ratio was. But people get fixated on a big number, and
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the way that media works. They know that people will. So, and especially with like liberal media and left leaning media, like they obviously they would hope for, playing the game that both sides are playing. Like they would hope that the country looks as bad as it possibly can be heading
Exactly.
into
Hmm.
November. So there's that. But I thought the biggest thing was when CDC updated their reporting. Like, the actual number of deaths was really closer to 10,000,
Yeah.
and that like up to 95%, I think they said up to 94, 95% of the 200,000 people that had died from pre-existing conditions, like there was like nothing that really suggested that it really played a role in those
Yeah.
deaths.
They like
Which, and that's
averaged like 2.6 like severe illnesses, like in addition to having COVID. Like, it was like the average age was like 70 plus, and then 2.5 like
Yeah.
serious ailments. Like
Mhm.
it could be like diabetes, Alzheimer's, like whatever. But like they averaged more than two, and then also being 70 plus years of age for like the like 90 something percent of the deaths.
Yeah. So, and when you think about that number realistically, I mean, over 90% or, over 7 years old, the life expectancy of any human in this country is what, like 75, 77, I
I
think.
Yeah.
believe so.
So, there's very little to suggest that their life was cut short, but
Right.
also too, like, and I have my sister's a doctor. I come from a family of doctors and nurses. And so, like, the idea of, like, listen to the science, like, we hear that all the time, listen to the science. And that's valid, but it's valid in two directions,
Mhm.
like, listen to the science. Yes, this is a very real virus, 100%. There's no denying that. But there's also, on the other side of it, there's no science that can suggest that something played a role in your pre-existing conditions. So if you had, asthma or whatever the case is, like, it's it's almost like an educated guess whether or not it exasperated those things.
Right.
Mhm.
Like, there's nothing that they can't just run a blood test and say, yep, this virus definitely caused that. Like, they're literally guessing, but they don't, common knowledge is, oh, if they had it, it definitely played a role. And there's literally, like, not a way to prove that it did. Like, it's a guess.
Right.
So, you know, um, and I like early studies too, um, back as far as like February, March, were that this was, and this is a historical thing too. Same as like with anything, like, um, it it was gonna pass through our society anyway. Like,
Mhm.
the only true lockdown and quarantine is solo, by yourself, no deliveries, nothing, like plastic bubble, like
Yeah.
room.
Mhm.
That, like, that's what quarantine is. Not with you and seven family members ordering Amazon and Uber Eats. Like, that's not
Yeah.
Yeah.
quarantine. That's so we never did what we intended to do in the first place. So
Yeah.
it's so there's a lot of, like, sort of inconsistencies about it in
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah. One thing, like kind of you mentioning with like quarantine and like what what the real definition of quarantine is and then what it's been, that's kind of a personal pet peeve of mine, is when people take like words with very serious definitions and then dilute its power because they just use it improperly. Like with quarantine, like people are talking about like they've been quarantining for like however long, and they'll
Mhm.
go out and like they'll just go through the drive through instead of going inside, or like they'll hang out with just three friends instead of four friends or whatever. And like that's just a pet peeve of mine personally. But yeah, I mean I kind of think it's like serious because it does take power away from like certain words and like certain meanings and what certain people say, because you take a very serious thing and you just use it like it's commonplace when it really shouldn't be. Like quarantining isn't something that's like a common thing. Like that's
Yeah.
only happens whenever like something super serious is going on. So when you just use it like I don't know, like some young college student just like sitting at home for a week instead of going out to the beach or whatever, like that's not quarantining.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, like, my sister, she's a doctor, and treating patients that are, she she kind of like would shake her head at the way that we were handling it as a society, just because of the idea that we think we're safe if we do these things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's up for debate whether or not we're just safe in general. I mean, like, maybe this is really just like sort of like a non-flu, but that's a whole different debate, other than this. But if this truly is or was like this deadly virus all year long, it has yet to sort of be that. But if it was, like, she kind of like laughed at our idea of like what we're doing is quarantining, because she's like, when I go into a room and we have a positive patient or whatever the case may be, we come in full covering, and if we need to use an instrument on them, like, that stuff is brought in sealed, vacuum sealed in plastic, to be used once and then gotten rid of. Their food or any sort of that stuff is prepared in a certain way. Like, I mean, they're literally a boy in a bubble, basically, is what it is. You know, when they leave that room, those masks, those gloves, none of that stuff gets reused, or even they don't even wear it a second longer. It's gone. Like, that's real, like, medical science quarantine.
Right.
Like, yeah. So, like, to hang out in your house with your wife and 3 kids and ordering Pizza Hut, like, you know, buying clothes off of Amazon, like, that's not
Right.
that's not like you there should be zero contact with the outside. So
Yeah. And kind of back to what we were talking about earlier with social media. You know, with the CDC when they released like their updated information, I just, like, took a screenshot of it, so like I just had the information on hand, and it was basically saying like the infection fatality ratio. So if like 0 to 19-year-olds, it's 0.0003%. For 20 to 50, it's 0.0002. 50 to 70, 0.005, and like so forth. And like the highest rate is 70 plus, and it's 0.05. And I like sent that to someone because I was saying that, like, you know, the CDC updated their numbers recently. Like, can you want me to send them to you? And so I did. And then they reported it. And then I got like a message from Instagram saying to like not post false information. Like, my thing got fact checked. And I was like, this is a screenshot from the CDC's like website of their chart. And like they got me for fact checking, and they like deleted what I posted and like took it down and like gave me a warning.
Which, and the funny thing about that is, and yeah, I remember, I think I posted about this too, but like in the beginning, the idea of like listen to the science, listen to the numbers, it was based on listening to the CDC. You know, the CDC said this is really dangerous. You guys should do this, this, and this, and everybody was like, listen to them. That's what they're saying. But when they come back and say, listen, we've been monitoring this. We need to update you on how this is going. It's not as bad. These are the real numbers. All of a sudden, it's like, don't listen to them anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, that just goes to show like how the political narrative has taken it over. You know, it's not even about the science anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, I find it really funny that how they always they switch it up whenever it starts going bad. Originally, it was the World Health Organization. Then it was the CDC. Now I don't even know who we're listening to this time.
Well, what's interesting is, and like rightfully so, the science is. I wouldn't say the science is changing, but what we know is changing because, you know, it's a new thing. And so originally we were told that it wasn't transmittable from human-to-human contact. We found out that was wrong. We were told some people said masks aren't effective. Some people say it was. And so when the science is changing, and you say listen to the science, like, you know, listen to the science, but when it's changing, you have to listen to it as it gets updated. Like, you listen to like old reports, and then like you pick and choose what you want to listen to for the sake of your argument. But like different organizations are saying different things because they have different information, and it's new, and, you know, we're making tremendous strides towards what we know about it, but it's still changing. And so it's difficult, especially when people try to have an argument about it. Like you were saying, it's become politicized, and it really shouldn't be, because it's like, it's a virus. Like, why should a virus that, like, you know, it hurts people, like kills people, why should that be a political discussion? But like that's what it's become, because people just use it as a like political weapon.
Yeah, and I remember back in March, like yeah, it was back in March, and a friend of mine who's older, like I am, and they lived through the 80s and the HIV and AIDS like explosion around that time. And I remember in the beginning, like when a lot of people were like, look, this is not something to overreact to, blah, 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 blah. And his take, which I thought was a really rational and interesting take, was that like, yeah, well, that's what we all said about AIDS and HIV. But as we went, we started to learn more and more about it. And we started to learn more and more dangerous things about it that we didn't realize before. And then we continued to learn, you know, the relative safety of it, that it's not as easy to get, and this and that, you know. So it was like you slowly learn that it is much more deadly than you think, and will be like, you know, a lot like your timeline is a lot worse than you think it would be. But then we learned like, okay, the act of transmission and stuff like that is a lot more safe than you think it is. And so the idea was apply that to this, like, you know, the science is going to keep changing, so, you know, proceed with caution. I remember in the beginning, I thought, okay, that's actually reasonable, because like, you know, I didn't think, and I still don't think that it was that, you know, dangerous of a thing, but that's a reasonable way to look at it. But as we go, you know, as you said, and you can see, people are picking and choosing the science that they want to listen to, and
Mhm.
that becomes not proactive.
Yeah. So, moving on from COVID and I guess super huge political issues, there's just a couple of small ones I was just kind of curious personally on your opinions of that I just kind of saw in the news a few weeks ago. There's like a growing movement to like make DC a state, and then
Yeah.
kind of within that, that's a smaller movement is make Puerto Rico like a state as well, since like they're a territory. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Um, I mean, I don't know. Like, that's a little bit above my comprehension as far as like the economic ramifications of expanding and drawing lines that way. I remember the last couple of years, I kept hearing that they wanted to divide California
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
into a north and south, same way as Carolina is. So um, that is beyond my comprehension of how our nation's, budget and economics are balanced in that way. Um, Outside of that, I mean, I don't really have, I guess, any opinion on it. I mean, if we end up with 53 states or something, then we end up with 53 states, I guess. Puerto Rico is like an odd one in that, like, kind of like Hawaii, it's detached in a way that, like, it kind of, I don't know if that will affect certain things with it being a state, but I mean, I guess if Hawaii and Alaska are sorted out just fine, then why not?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah.
I think like one of the biggest reasons, and I'm glad you mentioned California, and like there's that conversation to split that up into two or three different states. It all stems, I think, from just the fact that we have an electoral college. So like the whole state's votes go to one person. So the argument for splitting up California is they have so many votes as California, but like there's a good like third of California that votes red, and like those don't get represented. I mean, you could say that for any state as well. Like
Same thing with New
Yeah.
York.
yeah, like
I mean,
well, I mean
the difference between Northern California, I mean like above the Bay Area, like extreme north, and like Southern California is so drastic,
Hmm.
Like I mean, half the state is literally a forest, the rest is a desert and a beach. Like, I mean, it's just such a big, all-encompassing state that it's, I do think that there's an odd unbalance, to it,
yeah,
Hmm.
imbalance.
yeah. Do you have any questions, Felix?
Um, Not that I can think of right now. I've just been listening and processing.
Yeah. All right. Well, I have just one last thing I want to ask you,
Yeah.
and it's something my dad told me to ask actually, and it was just like what aren't like whenever you do interviews like this or whatever, what don't people ask you that you think they should? Like I've obviously asked you about like things that I thought would be relevant and like big topics, but like what are questions that you wish you got asked more that you think people should be asking someone like you that people aren't?
Um, Good question. I mean, to be honest, this is the first time I've ever done a podcast that was centered around like politics and social politics and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Um, Normally, I, I honestly can't think of another one I've ever done that's like this. And then, generally speaking, a lot of the more career-based ones go the same way. Like where when did you start? What made you want to do what you do? Things like that. Do you have a favorite this or that or whatever? Usually stuff like that. But I don't know. I mean, I sometimes I feel like upbringing and uh like more personal background stuff, and I don't mean super personal, but just like getting an idea of where somebody comes from and their life beyond what their career and what their opinions are, I think is like something that goes overlooked. And to be honest, is like I feel like that's so much more important. Like for example, like I don't think that I'm the most opinionated person, but when I do have opinions, they're often so, I don't want to say against the grain, but they're so like independent and original to me that a lot of times it rubs people the wrong way. But people are
Hmm.
extremists now. Like we were talking about social media, they're extremists. If you're not with us, you're 100% against us. And it's like that's not reality. So I feel like sometimes when people see that it's like, I'm not like an ultra masker, or I'm not like, party affiliated or something, or I don't vote, like they have this idea of me that's so abrasive and like not who I am, you know, like such an immature, ineloquent like version of me. And so very rarely do they think about like, well, they may sort of perceive things the way that they do, but like, do they actually live that way? And the answer is no. Most people don't. You know, most people have, you know, their own unique, quiet lives, and I feel like that's a pretty important thing to sort of dive into with people that we don't do enough, just as humans or in interview form. You know.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, at least for me personally, that's one of the reasons I like reached out to you is because, like, you know, like I was saying earlier, it kind of seems like, well, at least your perspective on politics is different. Like, you don't look at it as like a left versus right, and you're like in the middle of that. You, like you said, like, kind of like Yoda. Like, you look at it from the outside, kind of like a more wise perspective. And, you know, we're not a very big podcast, but you're the only person that like I've reached out to like try and have on, because like just seeing like how you talk about things just like genuinely interested me, and I thought you'd be a really fun person to talk to about it.
I mean,
I appreciate that.
When I first saw you start posting, I got excited. I actually DM'd you when you responded. I was like, that was a huge day for me, actually.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. It's funny, you know. Like if, like for example, my idea of politics is almost like 99% economics.
Mm-hmm.
So everything else, I think we're all thinking the same thing here. We all don't want to fight a war. We'd love to, you know, lower pollution as much as possible, but not to the detriment of like our country being like economically like crumbling.
Yeah.
You know, we all believe in equality, you know, like we're all on the same side for the most part. But then I'll see stuff like I'm very anti-socialism. And if I post something about economics, it's anti-socialist or something like that. Maybe it's a meme or a political cartoon or something. You know, I'll get tons of messages like, "Oh, so you're a Trumper then?" And it's like, what does being anti-socialist have to do with picking a team for one? Like, why does it automatically put you like
in the opposite end?
Like what? Why? Because if I don't believe in socialist policies, am I an alt-right like foot soldier like that? You know, it's crazy. So I think for that reason, it's like, you know, like people in general should dive into a little more understanding like people's lives aren't so extreme that way, you know. They're just not.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. It was a good conversation.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, once I get it edited and stuff, I'll like email you a copy and stuff, and you know, you can check it out if you want to.
No, please do. It's my pleasure.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have a good night, man.
All right, you too. Thank you guys.